Today's lesson is Module 2, Lesson 15, the division algorithm, converting decimal division into whole number division. And today's lesson is going to be a little bit different. This lesson calls for a lot of mental math strategies. I think that most of us typically use those in math. I'm not going to work through those examples. I'm actually going to be jumping to the end of the lesson because there's a really important piece at the end of the lesson that I think that we need to make sure that we get covered. And this part of the lesson is where we are making division number sentences true by adding decimals. So for example, if this is my problem, 446,642 divided by 85 4/10 is equal to 52 3/10. What I have to do is figure out where the decimal needs to be in the dividend. There's already a decimal in the divisor. There's already a decimal in the quotient. So now what I have to do is figure out where would that be in my dividend. So the first thing I have to do is I'm going to set it up the same way I would any other division problem as a fraction first. Now, because there is one digit after the decimal, typically that means I multiply by 10, both the bottom and the top. I'm not going to do anything to the top right now. I'm just going to move the bottom. That's going to give me my whole number, 854. Then I would write out my division algorithm. Whoops, I left a 6 out. Then I see my answer is here, and as I told you before, the answer already has the decimal in it, and it's correct. So I need to figure out where would this answer go, over which numbers would this answer go, so that I can correctly place the decimal in my dividend. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look at my divisor. And you can see here that my divisor is three digits. So I'm going to just look at the first 3 digits. You'll notice here that the divisor is bigger than those in the dividend. So that means I have to go over to a 4th place. So that's where my very first digit in my quotient is going to go. It's going to go into that first place where I could write. So that's where my 5 would go. That means my 2 goes above my 4 and then my 0.3. When we divide decimals and there's a decimal in our quotient, that means there was also a decimal in our dividend, and it goes directly below wherever it is in the quotient, which means that this would have been where I started or where I ended up. So when I did my work up here and I got my 854 after I multiplied by 10, well, after I multiplied by 10, I would have also gotten this number here, 44664.2. So since I'd multiplied by 10, I would actually be dividing this one by 10 to move this decimal backwards. So in my original problem, my decimal goes before my 4. we'll do this again in the student book. If you will now go ahead and go to the next page in your notebook and write this statement down. What to do when there is a decimal in the dividend when you're ready to divide. I'm going to do an example with you so that you have it for reference, because there may be one or two in today's bookwork where you'll need to practice this. And our first one is going to be 1,500 divided by 8. Now you'll notice that there are no decimals in this problem, so I'm going to just set it up for the standard algorithm. And because I'm dividing by 8, remember that I make my T-chart for 8. Then I'm going to go ahead and work out my division algorithm. So since I have one digit here, I can see that the 1 is smaller than the 8, so I need to go over to the 15. So I have to look for a number over here that's close to 15 without going over, and that partner is 1. Subtract 8 from 15. That gives me 7. Bring down my 0. So now I'm going to look for a number close to 70 without going over. That's 64. That partner is 8. Make sure I put it right above that number that I'm bringing down. Subtract. Bring down my 0. Number closest to 60 without going over. That's 56. That partner is 7. Subtract. Now notice I have nothing left to bring down, and I have a remainder here. Now in the past, you may have put an R up here and then put your 4. Now we're going to ask that you add in a decimal and a 0. You'll remember in the example I just gave you that when you have a decimal in your dividend, it goes in the same place as your quotient. So I often tell students to just go ahead and put that in right away, whenever you're doing your work, so that you have it there. So now I bring down this 0. I'm going to keep following my regular algorithm practice. Now I'm going to look for the same answer here. Its partner is 5. And now that I've finally gotten to a 0, I can stop. Now I want you to take out your student book and open it up to page S69. We're actually going to skip the first page in the lesson for right now. It's not what we need to practice with. I want you to do 1 through 4 on page 69, and I want you on page 70 to do 5, 6, and 7. On page 70, I want you to go ahead and take the time and do that with a partner now. Work it out, pause the video, and then come back and check your work before we move on to the next portion of today's lesson. you should have completed exercises 1 through 7. Go ahead and check your work. For number 1, you should have put 770 in the box, 14 outside the box. Made your multiplication chart for 14. After you work out all the division, you should have gotten the answer of 55. For number 2, 1005 goes in the box, 5 is outside of the box. You should have made a multiplication table for 5. I put that over here because I was going to use that for another problem. When I work out the division, I got 201. For number 3, this is the exact same example that was in your notebook today. We've already done this problem and we actually did it together. You should have gotten 187.5. And for number 4, you could have reused that 5 multiplication chart and your answer should have been 252. Go on to the next page. Remember, you can always pause this video if you need to. On the next page, you were dividing decimals, so you should have set it up, determined that in the first one that you needed to multiply by 100, which gave you 2,500 divided by 625. This time, because the number was so big, I only went to 5, and it worked out in my favor. If it wouldn't have worked out, I would have needed to extended it. You would have gotten the answer of 4. In number 6, you should have multiplied your fractions by 10, which gave you 63 divided by 15. Made, again, a multiplication chart for 15, and your answer was 4 2/10. So this example was one that also had a decimal in the dividend that you would have to push up into your quotient, just like that example number 3, I believe it was, that we did together earlier. And then number 7, again, you should have multiplied both parts of your fraction by 10, which gave you 4,250 divided by 25. Made your multiplication table for 25, and then that gives you the answer of 170. Feel free to pause this video right now if you need to. We're going to go on. We're going to skip over example number 3 for right now, and we are going to go on to example number 4 in your book. So that's on page 72. This time, this is going to be just like that very first example that we did in our notebook together. We're going to have to make sure that the decimal is in the correct place. So it says Sally was given the number sentence, was given this number sentence, and was asked to place the decimal point correctly in the quotient, so the answer. And this is what she came up with. 55.6875 divided by 6.75 is equal to 0.825. So the first question is, do you agree with Sally? And then divide to prove your answer is correct. So before I can decide if I agree with Sally, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the problem and see if it works. So if I have 55.6875 over 6.75, what I have to first figure out is what am I going to multiply by? I see there's 2 digits here, so that tells me I'm going to multiply both by 100. When I move my decimal 2 places, that gives me the whole number 675. When I move my decimal 2 places here, it now puts my decimal between the 8 and the 7. So now this becomes my algorithm. So if I have to divide this, remember I told you that when you have a decimal in your dividend, you can always put it straight up into your quotient before you even start. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check before I would start dividing. I have 3 digits here. So if I just look at these first 3 digits here, I can see that the digits in my dividend are smaller than my divisor. So that tells me I would have to go over to a 4th place. Now, in our answer that she had given us, 0 was in her first place. We all know that 675 goes into 5,568 more than 0 times, which means that that next number, that 8, is what would go here, not 0. So, do I agree with Shelley? No. No, I do not agree with Shelley. I believe that the 8 would have to go there first. So now it wants me to divide to prove my answer is correct. So again, I'm going to make my multiplication chart. Through the power of video and the pause button, I was able to work that out because I didn't have that worked out ahead of time. So now I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that problem. And I'm going to see if 8 would have worked. If I look at my multiplication chart, I can see that 8 is the closest number at 5,400. Subtract. Bring down my 7. I can see that it will go into 1,687 2 times. And that is 1,350. Subtract. Bring down my 5. And that matches number 5. So I can see now that this would have matched what I said here, where you would have needed 8 as the whole number and not 0. So for today's assignment, you've done a lot of division practice. Today's assignment, I want you to go to the problem set. And in the problem set, what I want you to do is I want you to focus on 17, 18, and 19. We're not going to do 1 through 15 today. So I just want you to practice that last skill that we did together because you've done enough long division practice for having no decimals, having decimals, adding decimals in. If you have any questions, feel free to watch this video again or let me know.